Commander Vrexis stood at the viewport of Way Station Theta 9 and watched the human shuttle approach with a feeling of deep amusement mixed with contempt. His species, the Korath, had ruled their corner of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. And they had done so through strength and through the simple fact that they were the most dangerous predators ever to achieve. Spaceflight Vrexis himself stood 8 feet tall, and his body was covered in scales as black as the void between stars. And when he flexed his hands, claws the length of human fingers extended from his fingertips, each one capable of cutting through steel plating, like it was nothing more than wet paper. The Korath had conquered 17 star systems, and they had never once lost a war because no species had ever been foolish enough to fight them for long. And now these humans wanted to talk about trade routes. Vrexis let out a low rumble of laughter that made his translator device crackle. The humans had only discovered faster than light travel about 50 years ago, and in that time they had spread across a handful of worlds with a speed that some found alarming. But Vrexis found merely amusing. They were small creatures, barely reaching his chest in height, and they had no claws and no fangs and no scales to protect their soft pink skin. They were prey animals who had somehow stumbled into the stars, and Vrexis was certain that sooner or later some predator species would simply take everything they had built, perhaps even the Korath themselves, if the humans had anything worth taking. His mate, Theska, came to stand beside him, and she too watched the approaching shuttle with her golden eyes narrowed in what might have been curiosity or might have been hunger. "They look like food," she said in the growling language of their people. "They look like something that should have been food." Vrexis agreed, but somehow they learned to build ships instead of becoming meals for whatever predators lived on their world. Strange creatures, very strange. Between them, holding onto his mother's leg, stood their young son Ricketh. He was only 3 cycles old, but he already showed the promise of becoming a fine predator, and his scales were coming in dark and glossy, and his little claws were sharp enough to leave scratches on the metal floors of their ship. Ricketh was the reason they had brought him to this diplomatic summit, because among the Korath, it was tradition to bring your family to important negotiations as a show of strength and dominance. A Korath who came alone was a Korath with something to hide, but a Korath who brought his mate and his cub was showing the galaxy that he feared nothing and no one. The human shuttle docked with a gentle thump that Vrexis could feel through the floor, and he straightened his ceremonial armor and prepared to meet these strange soft creatures. The airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and the humans stepped through. There were 5 of them in total, and they all wore simple gray uniforms that seemed almost boring compared to the elaborate armor and decorations of the Korath delegation. At their head was a woman with dark hair pulled back from her face, and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with a quick intelligence that Vrexis had not expected from a prey species. This was Ambassador Sarah Chun, and Vrexis had read her file before the summit. She was considered one of humanity's best diplomats, and she had successfully negotiated treaties with 7 different alien species before this meeting. None of those species had been predators, though. Vrexis wondered if she would be so confident when faced with someone who could kill her with a single swipe of his claws. "Commander Vrexis," Chum said, and her translator device rendered her words into acceptable Korath. "Thank you for agreeing to this summit, and we hope that today marks the beginning of a long and profitable relationship between our peoples." She smiled as she spoke, and Vrexis noted how she showed her teeth when she did so. Odd behavior for a prey animal, he thought, because among most species showing your teeth was a threat display. But humans seemed to do it when they were happy. Perhaps they were simply too stupid to know better, Ambassador Chan. Vrexis replied, making sure to let his own fangs show in what was definitely a threat display. "The Korath Dominion welcomes you to this neutral station, and we look forward to hearing what your people have to offer." If she was intimidated by his display, she did not show it, and her smile never wavered, and her eyes never dropped from his. Strange behavior indeed, behind the ambassador. Rexus noticed a smaller human, a child with the same dark hair as Chun but with rounder cheeks and curious eyes that darted around the docking bay, taking in every new sight with obvious excitement. The child could not have been more than 7 or 8 human years old, and Rexus felt a moment of surprise that Chen had brought her offspring to such an important meeting. Perhaps humans had similar traditions to the Korath, after all. I see you have brought your family as well, Chen said, nodding toward Theska and Ricketh. This is my daughter Maya, and I hope you don't mind that. I brought her along because this station has excellent educational facilities, and I thought she might enjoy seeing so many different species. In one place, Maya waved at them with a small hand, and Rexus saw that she had no claws at all, and her fingers were blunt and soft-looking. Ricketh stared at the human child with intense interest, and his small tail twitched back and forth the way it did when he spotted something that triggered his hunting instincts. Rexus made a mental note to keep an eye on his son, because while killing a human child would not technically violate any laws at this neutral station, it would certainly complicate the negotiations. The summit chambers are this way, said one of the station administrators, a 4-armed creature from a species Rexus could not immediately identify. If you would all follow me, please. They walked through the corridors of the station, and Rexus noticed how the other species they passed gave the Korath delegation a wide berth, and how their eyes tracked the predators with obvious fear. The humans did not do this. They walked alongside the Korath as if they were equals, and Chun even made small talk about the architecture of the station and the interesting mix of design elements from different cultures. Rexus did not know what to make of these creatures. They were clearly prey, and yet they did not act like prey, and they showed no fear even when they should have been terrified. Perhaps they were simply too new to the galactic community to understand how dangerous the Korath truly were. They would learn soon enough. Rexus thought everyone always learned eventually. The negotiations were boring. That was the only thought in young Ricketh's mind as he sat beside his mother in the Grand Summit Chamber and listened to the adults talk about things like trade percentages and shipping lanes and mutual defense obligations. He did not understand most of what they were saying, and he did not care to understand because he was 3 cycles old, and the universe was full of interesting things, and none of those things were happening in this room. His father sat across the table from the human ambassador, and they exchanged words that meant nothing to Ricketh, while holographic displays showed star maps and resource charts that meant even less. Ricketh's claws itched. He wanted to run, and he wanted to hunt, and he wanted to find something to chase, because that was what young Korath were supposed to do. His mother noticed his restlessness, and she placed one massive clawed hand on his head in a gesture that was meant to be calming, but only made him more frustrated. "Be still, little one," Theska whispered in their native tongue. "This is important. It is boring," Ricketh whispered back. "Many important things are boring, but you must learn patience, because patience is what separates a successful hunter from a dead one." Ricketh did not want to learn patience. He wanted to learn how to catch things after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 hours. The adults announced a recess in the negotiations, and Ricketh finally saw his chance to escape while his parents spoke with other members of the Korath delegation. He slipped away through a side door and found himself in a long corridor that curved away in both directions. Freedom at last. He wandered through the station with no destination in mind, and he let his senses guide him toward whatever might be interesting. The station was full of strange smells and strange sounds and strange creatures that looked at him with fear in their eyes and hurried to get out of his way. This pleased Ricketh greatly, because it meant that even at his young age, he was already a predator that others respected and feared. He found his way to an observation deck where massive windows looked out at the stars and the various ships docked at the station. It was a quiet place with comfortable seating and soft lighting, and Ricketh was about to leave because quiet places were boring places when he noticed that he was not alone. There in the corner sat the human child he had seen earlier. She was curled up on a large cushion with some kind of device in her hands, and she was so focused on whatever she was looking at that she had not noticed him enter. Ricketh's hunting instincts flared to life. Here was something small, and something soft, and something that was clearly not paying attention to its surroundings, which meant it was practically begging to be hunted. He dropped into a crouch and let his scales shift color slightly to blend with the shadows the way his father had taught him, slowly. And silently, he crept closer to the human child. She still did not notice him. His tail twitched with excitement, and his claws extended from his fingertips, and he could feel his heart beating faster as the thrill of the hunt took over when he was only a few feet away. He let out a hiss. It was a good hiss and a threatening hiss, and it was the kind of sound that had sent young prey animals running in terror on every world the Karth had ever visited. The human child looked up from her device. She did not run, she did not scream, she did not even flinch. Instead, she looked at Ricketh with an expression that he could not understand, and then her face twisted into something that looked almost like anger. "That is rude," she said. Ricketh did not know what to do with this response, because prey was not supposed to call predators rude and prey was supposed to run, and this prey was clearly broken somehow. He hissed again, and this time he made sure to show all of his teeth, and he raised his claws so that the light glinted off their sharp edges. "You are being very rude," the human child said again, and she crossed her arms over her chest in a gesture that seemed defiant. "My mom says we do not hiss at people, and hissing is mean." Ricketh felt his confusion growing because nothing about this encounter was going the way it was supposed to go. On his homeworld, the young prey animals would have been halfway across the territory by now, and their fear scent would have been thick in the air, and Ricketh would have been chasing them with joy in his hearts. But this creature just sat there and looked at him like he was the one doing something wrong. "Do you want to see my book?" the human child asked suddenly. "It has dinosaurs in it, and dinosaurs are really cool." Ricketh did not know what a dinosaur was, and he did not know what a book was, but he knew that he was a predator, and she was prey, and there were rules about how these things were supposed to work. He hissed a third time. The human child sighed, and the sound was full of disappointment. "Fine," she said. "If you do not want to be friends, then I am going to keep reading, and you can go hiss at someone else, because I am busy." She turned back to her device and ignored him completely. Ricketh stood there with his claws out and his fangs showing, and he had never felt more confused in his entire young life. This was wrong. This was all wrong. He was a Karth, and she was a soft little prey creature, and she was supposed to be afraid of him, but instead, she was ignoring him like he was nothing more than a minor annoyance. The insult burned in his chest. He would make her fear him. He would make her understand what he was. Without thinking about the consequences, Ricketh lunged forward, and he was not trying to kill her because even he knew that killing things at diplomatic summits was frowned upon, but he wanted to scare her, and he wanted to show her that he was dangerous. His claws caught her arm as she tried to pull away, and he felt them cut through her soft skin, and he saw red blood well up from the scratches he had left. The human child let out a sound of pain, and Ricketh felt a surge of satisfaction, because finally she was reacting the way prey was supposed to react. But then something happened that Ricketh had never experienced before in his life. The human child lunged right back at him. Her blunt little teeth clamped down on his snout, right on the most sensitive part of his face where the scales were thinnest and the nerves were closest to the surface. Pain exploded through Ricketh's skull, and he let out a shriek that echoed through the observation deck. He scrambled backward and tried to get away, but the human held on for a moment longer. Before finally releasing him, Ricketh's eyes watered, and his snout throbbed, and he could not believe what had just happened. The prey had bitten him. The prey had attacked him. The prey had hurt him. The human child stood up and there was blood running down her arm from where he had scratched her butt. She did not seem to care about that at all. Instead, she pointed at him with one small finger, and her face was twisted with anger. "Bad." She shouted at him, "We do not scratch, and you say sorry right now." And then she started walking toward him. The security footage spread across the galactic networks faster than anyone could have predicted. Within hours of the incident, every major news service in known space had obtained a copy of the recording, and within days it had been viewed by billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. The footage was not particularly high quality because it came from a standard security camera mounted in the corner of the observation deck, but it showed everything clearly enough. It showed a young Korath predator stalking a human child. It showed the predator hissing and displaying its claws in classic threat behavior. It showed the human child refusing to flee, and then it showed what happened next. The galaxy had never seen anything quite like it. News commentators from a dozen different species tried to explain what they were watching, but most of them struggled to find the right words. As you can see in this footage, said a Volanti broadcaster with trembling antennae, the Korath juvenile lunges at the human child and makes contact with its claws. And we can see blood on the child's arm, and normally this would be the end of the encounter because normally the prey would be incapacitated or fleeing, but instead we see something remarkable. The footage showed Maya recovering from the initial attack in less than a second. It showed her launching herself at the young Korath with no hesitation whatsoever. It showed her teeth closing on his snout. The human child counterattacks. The broadcaster continued, and there was genuine shock in his voice. The human child, who is half the size of the Korath juvenile and who has no natural weapons whatsoever, actually counterattacks, and she does so with what appears to be practiced aggression. Across the galaxy, beings watched the footage again and again. They slowed it down and studied every frame. They analyzed the human child's body language and her facial expressions, and they tried to understand what they were seeing. "Notice how she does not hesitate," said a Korath military analyst who had been asked to provide expert commentary. "When my people's young are attacked, they either fight or flee, and the decision is made in an instant, based on an assessment of whether they can win, but this human child does not seem to make any such assessment, and she simply attacks as if winning or losing is not even a consideration." But it was what happened after the bite that truly captured the galaxy's attention. The footage showed young Ricketh scrambling backward with a shriek of pain. It showed him putting distance between himself and the human child. It showed him cowering, and it showed Maya standing up with blood running down her arm and pointing at him, and then walking toward him, not running away, walking toward him. "This is unprecedented behavior for a prey species," said a xenobiologist from the Central Academic Institute. "When a prey animal is injured by a predator, the universal response across every known species is to flee and to put as much distance between themselves and the threat as possible. But this human child does the exact opposite." The footage continued, and it showed Maya lecturing Ricketh while he backed away from her. The audio was not great, but enhancement software managed to pick up most of what she was saying. "You say sorry. Right now. We do not scratch people. That was very mean, and you are being bad." The galaxy watched a 7-year-old human child scold a Korath predator like he was a misbehaving pet, and the Korath cub took it. He cowered and he retreated, and he made himself as small as possible while this tiny soft creature advanced on him and demanded an apology. "I have watched this footage perhaps 100 times," admitted the Korath military analyst, "and I still do not fully understand what I am seeing, and I have never in my life seen one of our young behave this way, and I have never seen any prey species behave this way either." The moment that would be replayed the most was the final 30 seconds of the encounter. Ricketh had backed himself into a corner near a large decorative planter, and he could not retreat any further. Maya stood in front of him with her hands on her hips. She was bleeding, and she had tears on her face from the pain, but she was not backing down. "You hurt me," she said, "and that was wrong. And when we do something wrong, we say sorry, and we do not do it again, and those are the rules." Ricketh stared at her with wide eyes. "Rules," he repeated in a small voice. "Yes, rules, and everybody has to follow the rules, even you." And then the doors to the observation deck opened and the adults arrived. The footage showed Commander Vrexis and Theska rushing in with their claws extended and their bodies ready for violence. It showed Ambassador Chun right behind them with 2 human security officers. It showed everyone freezing in place as they took in the scene before them. A bleeding human child standing over a cowering Korath juvenile. The prey dominant over the predator. The galaxy did not know what to make of it. "We have been studying humans since they achieved faster than light travel," said the xenobiologist in a subsequent interview, "and we classified them as a prey species based on their physical characteristics, because they have no claws and no fangs and no natural armor, and they are not particularly fast or strong compared to known predator species. But I am beginning to think that we may have made a serious error in our classification." The footage went viral in a way that few pieces of media ever had. It was shared and discussed and analyzed on every world that had access to the galactic network. Memes were created, debates were held, theories were proposed. And somewhere in all of that noise, a quiet understanding began to form in the minds of beings across the galaxy. Perhaps humans were not prey after all. Perhaps they were something else entirely. Something that the galaxy had never encountered before. Something that did not fit neatly into the categories of predator and prey. Something new. And that possibility was either very exciting or very frightening, depending on who you asked. Commander Vrexis had seen many strange things in his long career as a military officer and diplomat. He had seen stars die and worlds burn. He had seen species rise to greatness and fall to ruin. He had stood on battlefields where the dead numbered in the millions, and he had walked through the ruins of civilizations that had stood for 10,000 years before the Korath came. But he had never seen anything like what he saw when he burst through the doors of that observation deck. His son, Ricketh, was cowering behind the planter with his tail wrapped around his body and his ears flat against his skull in a posture of absolute submission. And standing over him was a tiny human child with blood running down her arm and fire in her eyes. For a moment, Vrexis could not process what he was seeing because it simply did not make sense. Korath did not cower, Korath did not submit, and they certainly did not do either of those things when faced with something as small and soft and harmless as a human child. What happened here? Vrexis demanded, and his voice came out as a growl that made several of the station staff back away in fear. But the human child did not back away. She turned to face him, and she pointed at Ricketh with an accusing finger. "He scratched me," Maya said, and her voice was steady despite the tears still wet on her face. "And I told him that was bad, and that he needs to say sorry." Vrexis looked at his son. Ricketh would not meet his eyes. "Is this true?" Vrexis asked. Ricketh nodded miserably. Ambassador Chung pushed past the Korath delegation and rushed to her daughter's side, and Vrexis expected anger and expected demands for retribution, because that was what any Korath parent would do if their child was injured. Instead, Chun knelt down and took Maya's arm gently and examined the scratches with clinical calm. "These are not deep," Chun said. "They will heal fine with some basic treatment. And Maya, what have I told you about approaching alien children without supervision?" Maya's defiant expression flickered. "But Mom, he started it." "That does not mean you bite people, sweetheart." Vrexis felt his understanding of the situation shift. The human ambassador was not angry about her child being injured. She was concerned about her child biting someone else. "Your daughter," Theska said slowly as she moved to stand beside Vrexis. "She is injured, and there is blood." Chime looked up at them and smiled, that strange toothy smile that Vrexis was beginning to realize was not a sign of submission at all. "Scratches," she said with a dismissive wave. She has had worse, falling off her bike, and children play rough sometimes, and I am sure your son did not mean any real harm. She turned to Maya. Did you bite him hard? Maya looked at the floor. Maybe a little bit. Chun sighed and stood up and turned to face the Korath delegation fully. I apologize for Maya's behavior, and shall we have the medical staff look at your son's snout, because I imagine that was not pleasant. Deska stared at the human ambassador with an expression that Vrexis had never seen on his mate's face before. It was confusion. Pure and complete confusion. You are apologizing, Deska said. Your child was attacked, and she is bleeding, and you are apologizing to us. Well, yes, because biting is not appropriate behavior, and Maya knows better. But Rikith attacked first, and Maya should have called for an adult instead of taking matters into her own hands. But unfortunately, my daughter has inherited my stubborn streak and my husband's temper. Chen's smile widened. Kids right, and they are all little savages at this age, and I'm sure yours is no different. Rexus did not know what to say. In Korath culture, if a child from one family injured a child from another family, it was grounds for a blood feud that could last for generations. The injured party would demand compensation, and the offending party would either pay or fight, and either way, blood would be spilled before honor was satisfied. But this human was treating the entire incident like it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, like her child being attacked by a predator was just something that happened sometimes, like it was normal. I do not understand you, Rexus said finally. Your child was attacked, and she is bleeding, and you show no anger, and you make no demands, and you apologize for her defending herself. Chum tilted her head and looked at him with those intelligent eyes. Commander, I have a question for you, if you do not mind. Ask. What did you expect me to do? Rexus thought about it. I expected you to be furious, and I expected you to demand punishment from my son, and I expected you to threaten consequences if we did not comply. Chun nodded. And what would that accomplish? It would establish that an attack on your family carries a price. But Rikith is a child, and children make mistakes, and punishing him harshly would not teach him anything except that humans are cruel. And is that the lesson you want him to learn? She gestured to where Maya was now sitting beside Rikith and showing him something on her device. The young Korath was still sniffling, but he was looking at the screen with growing interest. I would. Rather, he learned that humans are fair, and that we do not hold grudges against children for acting like children, and that when someone apologizes sincerely, we forgive them and move on. She looked back at Rexus. Is that not a better foundation for a relationship between our peoples? Rexus felt something shift in his understanding of humanity. He had thought they were weak because they did not respond to aggression with aggression. He had thought they were prey because they smiled and spoke softly and did not show their teeth in threat. But now he was beginning to see that their softness was not weakness at all. It was something else. It was something that the Korath had never developed because they had never needed to. It was the ability to choose not to fight. Not because they could not fight, but because they had decided that fighting was not the best path forward. And somehow that was more unsettling than any display of fangs or claws could ever be. Your daughter, Rexus said slowly. When Rikith attacked her, she did not flee. No, she did not. Any prey species in the galaxy would have fled. Chen's smile changed. It became something sharper. Something that made the predator part of Rexus's brain suddenly pay very close attention. Commander Rexus, she said softly, who told you that humans were prey? 10 years after the incident at Way Station Theta 9, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The footage of a human child standing down a Korath predator had sparked a complete re-evaluation of humanity's place in the galactic community, and the conclusions that xenobiologists had reached were simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. Humans were not prey. They had never been prey. They were something that the galaxy had never encountered before, and something that did not fit into any existing category. They were persistence predators. The term had come from human scientists who had explained their own evolutionary history to increasingly horrified alien academics. On Earth, humans had not survived by being faster than their prey or stronger than their prey. They had survived by being more stubborn than anything else on their planet. They would pick a target, and they would follow it, and they would keep following it until it collapsed from exhaustion, no matter how long that took, hours or days or weeks. It did not matter, humans would keep coming. And when they finally caught their prey, they did not use claws or fangs, because they had never developed those things. They used tools. They used weapons that they had created with their clever hands and their problem-solving brains. They used rocks and spears and eventually guns and bombs and things that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. The galaxy had looked at humans and seen soft bodies and blunt teeth and assumed weakness. The galaxy had been very, very wrong. Maya Chen was 17 now, and she sat in the cafeteria of the Interstellar Academy surrounded by beings from dozens of different species across from her set. Ricketh, who had grown into a massive Korath warrior with scales as black as his father's and claws that could cut through steel. They were best friends. I still cannot believe you bit my face, Ricketh said, as he tore into something that looked like raw meat, and probably was. You scratched me first, Maya replied as she ate something that the Korath would have considered barely food at all. And someone had to teach you manners since apparently your parents were not doing the job. Ricketh made a sound that was somewhere between a growl and a laugh. My parents are still embarrassed about that day, and my father says it was the moment he realized that everything he knew about humans was wrong. Well, maybe your species should not have assumed we were prey just because we look soft. You do look soft, and you look like an overgrown lizard, but I do not go around pointing that out. Ricketh laughed properly this time, and several nearby aliens flinched at the sound, because Korath laughter was not gentle. Maya did not flinch. She never had. My father published his memoirs last month, Ricketh said, and there is an entire chapter about the incident and about what he learned from it. I know, and my mom sent me a copy, and she said she was very flattered by what he wrote about her. What was your favorite part? Maya thought about it. The part where he talks about finally understanding why humans keep pets. Ricketh nodded slowly. That part disturbed many of my people greatly. I can imagine, the sectioning commander. Vrexus's memoirs about human pets had caused quite a stir throughout the galaxy. He had written about how humans had taken wolves, which were pack predators with sharp teeth and strong jaws, and had slowly turned them into dogs over thousands of years. They had not done this by conquering the wolves or by defeating them in battle. They had done it by making friends with them, and then they had done the same thing with cats, which were solitary ambush predators, and horses, which were large and powerful enough to crush a human with a single kick, and birds of prey with talons that could pierce flesh and beaks that could tear meat from bone. Humans looked at dangerous animals, and instead of running away or fighting them, they thought to themselves, I wonder if that would like to be my friend. And somehow it worked again and again throughout their history. Humans had taken things that could kill them and convinced those things to live in their homes and sleep in their beds and love them. The galaxy found this deeply unsettling. My favorite part, Ricketh said, was the ending. Maya nodded because she knew which part he meant. The memoirs had ended with a passage that had been quoted in news reports across hundreds of worlds. Commander Vrexus had written that his people had spent 10,000 years believing they were the ultimate predators in the galaxy, and that they had conquered through strength and ferocity and an unwillingness to back down from any challenge. But then they had met humans, and humans were not strong or ferocious. They did not have claws or fangs or scales, but they had something else. They had an absolute certainty that they belonged wherever they chose to stand. When a Korath threatened a human, the human did not run because running had never occurred to them as an option. When a Korath attacked a human, the human fought back because of course they did, because what else would they do? And when a Korath tried to intimidate a human, the human smiled and asked if they wanted to be friends. The galaxy had predators, and the galaxy had prey, and the division between them had seemed absolute and eternal. But humans were neither. They were something new. They were creatures who had clawed their way to the top of their food chain, not through physical superiority, but through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept that they could not. They were persistence predators who never stopped and never gave up and never accepted defeat. Even when defeat seemed certain, they were pack hunters who had learned to make alliances with anything and everything, including their own predators. And they had looked at the galaxy full of species that should have terrified them, and they had seen not threats, but potential friends. Perhaps that was the most terrifying thing of all. Do you know what I think? Maya said as she finished her meal. What? I think the galaxy was lucky that we decided to be friendly, because can you imagine what would have happened if we had decided to conquer instead? Ricketh was silent for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. I can imagine it, and it keeps me awake sometimes. Maya reached across the table and patted his massive clawed hand with her small soft one. Good thing we like you then. Good thing indeed. And far across the galaxy on a dozen different worlds. Beings who had once looked at humans with contempt or amusement were slowly learning the same lesson that young Ricketh had learned in that observation deck 10 years ago. Humans were not prey. They had never been prey, and the galaxy would never make the mistake of thinking otherwise again.